Well, 18 weeks are finally through, and the Philadelphia Eagles get ready to face the Green Bay Packers next week. But the Eagles completed the sweep of the New York Giants, defeating them on the final game of the regular season, 20-13. Welcome to the Bird's Nest Podcast. I'm Joe Donahue. Thank you so much for joining us. This game was completely meaningless for the Eagles. The Eagles couldn't improve or get worse in the standings based off of the outcome of this game. They are locked in at the number 2 seed. They were locked in at the number 2 seed going into this game. So this was an opportunity for the Eagles to take a look at some of the folks who are farther down on the roster. There was all kinds of discussion going into this game among Philly sports media regarding whether or not Saquon Barkley should be started in this game. And it became very apparent after the Minnesota Vikings defeated the Green Bay Packers last week that the Eagles weren't going to start Saquon Barkley. The question was whether or not Saquon Barkley should start in a meaningless game to go after the single-season rushing record, which he was 101 yards away from at the conclusion of the Philadelphia Eagles matchup last week against the Dallas Cowboys. And the Philadelphia Eagles didn't even amass 100 rushing yards among the running backs that were playing in the game. And honestly, going into the game, even independent of the hindsight element of it, I was a full fan of resting Saquon Barkley. Now, that having been said, the Eagles actually rested 11 players, so this was kind of a faux bye for them. Jalen Hurts was the only one who was on the inactive list due to injury. He's still undergoing concussion protocol. Everybody else on the inactive list was on there due to rest, which actually meant that for the first time since 2020 and the regular season finale against the Washington Commanders, the Eagles went into a game with fewer than the maximum number of uniformed players that they can have going into a game. But this was a good opportunity for those players who are not always playing in a regular season game to get out on the field and show what they've got, and for the Eagles to make an assessment of whatever needs they might need to address going into free agency, going into the draft. Tanner McKee had his first start as a Philadelphia Eagle. He did not have quite as good of a game as he did last week. He went 27 for 41 for 269 offensive passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Finished the day with a 100.6 passer rating. One of the big concerns that I had with Tanner McKee was that a lot of the passes that he had were misplaced. Whether it was a pass that was a little bit low, down at the feet, or it didn't sufficiently lead the receiver, or maybe it was too much leading the receiver. There were a lot of throws by McKee that were off target, and it wasn't necessarily because of the receiver being out of position. Similarly, there were a couple of throws that were tossed that could have been picked off. Now, Tanner McKee didn't have any interceptions, which is a really good thing, and there's definitely a foundation to build off of there for him, so that way he can develop going forward. But ultimately, Tanner McKee did what he had to do. The Eagles utilized Will Shipley and Kenny Gainwell in the run game. Kenny Gainwell, 11 carries, 14 yards. Will Shipley, 10 carries, 32 yards. Ainias Smith got a statistical carry as well. He had 1 carry for 4 yards. So the Philadelphia Eagles, again, we're using this just as an opportunity to get a look at some of those guys. And again, Will Shipley, I like what he has to put forward. I think he does need some more time in the cooker a little bit, so to speak. Does need some more time to develop. But he definitely has the potential to be a really good gadget running back. And that's also evidenced by his performance in the passing game and the receiving game. Will Shipley was 4 catches on 4 targets for 35 yards. So he was a really reliable resource for Tanner McKee in the receiving game. Now, the most notable starter in this game that did play was Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert had 4 catches on 6 targets for 55 yards. This was a good opportunity for him to get back because, again, Dallas Goedert was on injured reserve for the last few weeks. So he was activated off of injured reserve for this game. This is a good way for him to kind of get back into that groove, get used to catching passes, get used to getting hit. So that way he's not doing that for the first time in the playoffs. But the other receivers we got to take a look at, they did some good work as well. Jahan Dotson, 7 catches on 11 targets for 94 yards. Anaya Smith had 4 catches on 6 targets for 35 yards, had the first touchdown of the game that came through the air. E.J. Jenkins got into the mix as well. He had his only target was a catch, and it was a touchdown. We also got to see players like Johnny Wilson, Grant Calcaterra in the mix there in the receiving game. So it was definitely helpful to see a lot of those guys getting mixed in and seeing some of the folks that we don't always see on the Sunday, how they're going to perform. Defensively, the Eagles were able to keep the New York Giants out of it for the entirety of the first half. This game was scoreless through 2 quarters. Drew Lock, 22 for 29 in the passing game for 138 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick to end the game. One big concern was that Tyrone Tracy ran all over the Philadelphia Eagles secondary, 14 carries for 59 yards, including a longest of 16. The Giants actually wound up using 4 backs over the course of the day. Devin Singletary was the next one, 7 carries for 22 yards. Dane Belton had a 10-yard carry, and Eric Gray, who is normally one of the starters for the Giants, had a carry in there as well. The most reliable target for Drew Lock was Wan'Dale Robinson. The Eagles didn't really have a good answer for him in terms of pass breakups. Wan'Dale Robinson had 10 catches on 11 targets for 43 yards. Compare that to Malik Neighbors, who had 5 catches on 8 targets, but had 64 yards and a touchdown. But at the end of the day, the Eagles did what was expected of them. They defeated a wildly inferior divisional opponent in a completely meaningless game in front of a home crowd. That is an expectation. And that does a real job in terms of setting up momentum for the playoffs. Because when you do what you have to do in a game that has such low stakes, now you have something that you can build upon going into the playoffs. And the Eagles will host the Green Bay Packers next week at Lincoln Financial Field after the Green Bay Packers lost to the Chicago Bears and the Washington Commanders defeated the Dallas Cowboys. That locked both of them in. So the Eagles, as the number 2 seed, will play the Green Bay Packers, the number 7 seed. It's going to be a rematch of the season opener. It'll be the playoff opener. It's going to be a great time. But the difference is that it's going to be at Lincoln Financial Field. So no more neutral sites for this Philadelphia Eagles-Green Bay Packers matchup. But let me know what your thoughts are about this game going into the playoffs. What's on your mind? Where are you kind of sitting with this team? Let me know. And thank you so much to everybody for tuning into the Bird's Nest Podcast. You can support the Bird's Nest Podcast by liking and subscribing to Bird's Nest Media right here on YouTube, as well as by sharing to your social media pages. You can also find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, and the Odyssey app. Please visit birdsnestmedia.com for additional Eagles and NFL coverage, and if you feel so inclined to support us in a different way, you can find the link to our Patreon in the description below or at birdsnestmedia.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's go Eagles!